Hi, my name is Amber Winters, and for my film I chose The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc. This movie was made in 1999 by Frenchman director Luc Besson and actress Mia Jovovich. Also, actor Dustin Hoffman has a brief scene in there. This film begins with Joan of Arc when she's around the age of 12, walking through a forest. This young Joan suddenly has a vision of this god-looking man. He looks a lot like Jesus, as we would depict Jesus in modern times. He seems to be pointing off into the distance at something. Later on, after her vision ends, Joan finds a sword, a war sword, out in the forest with her, and she assumes this is what this Jesus-like figure was pointing to. She goes home to show her sister what she had found, but when she gets home, her town is being attacked by Englishmen, as this is the 100 Years' War, and it was very common for raids to be going on. And Joan's sister locks Joan in a closet, while Joan's sister is raped and murdered by an English soldier. In real life, Joan had said that she did have visions around the age of 12, except for in her visions, she didn't just have a single godlike figure. She said that she saw angels and she had saints, and especially the archangel Michael was usually in her visions. Joan's village was never attacked. It was reported that their church was burned down when Joan was around 17, but she would have been off fighting in Orleans around this time, not at home. Her sister was never raped and never murdered. This was something that the film decided to do. I think the film decided to have her sister murdered as kind of a motive for Joan to kind of get revenge against the English. You'll see why I'm saying this in a little bit. Anyway, so as in these visions, Joan is in the forest, but the forest is very bright and there's lots of birds and it's very happy when she's having her visions, as it should be, as I think anyone who's having a vision from God, they would want it to be happy and they would want it to be very empowering. And this movie represents that. I think the cinematographer did a very good job of representing when she was having her visions and when she was in real life. In real life, and especially in the battles, things were very gray and very bloody. Lots of blood and lots of dirt, which is appropriate to this time, as no one really took a shower. When they usually had lightness, like I said, it was in the vision. Darkness was usually seen when people were against God. Usually when you saw some English soldiers, especially like the rape scene I had mentioned, it was really, really dark. When the Dauphin, later on, before he becomes king, when he is, Dauphine, I'm sorry, before he is, crowned king, when he starts to doubt Joan, he's always shown as having kind of half white, half of a dark face, as it kind of seems like he's going against God. His mother-in-law also talks like that. And, before Joan is tried of witchcraft at the end of the film, the English and the judge are all like very dark dressed and everything's lower lighting. Of course, when Joan enters the scene, everything lightens up because she is the messenger of God. So you can see how lighting is kind of light equals God and darkness equals anti-God. Not only is light and darkness in this film, you can also see rain. I'm not sure if there's a lot of rain in this film just because it's Europe and it rains a lot in Europe, frankly, or if it's because usually rain occurred after a battle. So I don't know if that's representing starting anew or if that was just a coincidence. I'm not sure. To go on, lost my place. I had mentioned the light and the dark and the rain. When Joan goes to the castle to prove herself a maiden and a messenger of God, Joan is actually called La Pucelle in French, which means the maiden. That's her nickname in France. She was actually put under a test to test her virginity. In the movie, they have a scene where Joan is standing underneath a sheet, and a nursemaid seems to go through her lady parts and check for her virginity. I thought that this couldn't be true. That's because during this, Joan was standing in the middle of the courtroom. By courtroom I mean where the king and the queen and all of the court are standing. And I thought that couldn't be true, so I looked it up, and there is actually Joan's secretary or servant, her manservant, had actually reported this after she had died. He has said it is true that they had looked to find Joan's, I think he called it womanhood, something like that. They had looked through it to check, to verify it. So I thought that was interesting that during this time period, they thought that if they could prove anything about Joan, maybe they couldn't prove that she was sent by God, they could prove that she really was a virgin. So I thought that was interesting. I had mentioned her sister being raped earlier. The thing that really puts me off from this film is that Joan of Arc is a saint. She was sainted in 1920. In real life, she was sainted in 1920, 500 years after her death. She died and was convicted of witchcraft. So I think it's pretty interesting that someone who was committed of witchcraft and killed and burned at the stake was later canonized by the same church. So I think that's a pretty cool revolutionary idea. As Joan of Arc is one of the very few recognizable French icons throughout the world, the other being Napoleon, I thought it was interesting that a Frenchman, like I said, director Luc Besson, had chosen to kind of represent Joan in a different light. He was trying to make Joan seem more human. He was trying to show the psychological stages of Joan and how she was just more than just a picture on a painting on the wall or a picture in a book. So by doing this, like I had mentioned, the raping of her sister was kind of sent as a motive for her to later go on against the French. With the French against the English in the 100 Years' War. In this movie, Joan is really kind of depicted as kind of a psycho. She's pretty crazy. In some parts of the movie, she'll yell at her soldiers for cursing. In real life, she really did not like cursing, but there's no evidence that she would go crazy. Like, she would start screaming and shouting because they were cursing. There was no evidence of that. In this movie, they make her seem very unstable. They also make her seem doubtful and not very strong. The thing that led me toward this movie was because Joan of Arc is, a strong woman who's doing a man's job and she knows how to take care of things. But it seems like in this movie, she's scared and she's just a crazy little 17-year-old girl, which I think Luc Besson really thinks she was. In the 100 Years' War, France probably would not have won against England. England would have probably taken France if Joan of Arc had not raised morals for the men. And I think Luc Besson was trying to address that. Maybe we kind of made Joan of Arc into a bigger person than she really was. But I really didn't like the way he represented her. The very last scene, one of the very last scenes, is, I put it on my blog. It's Dustin Hoffman, who is actually Joan's conscious. He is talking to her, and in a sense, since he's her conscious, she's talking to herself. He is saying that, did you really find that sword in the field, or was it just dropped by a soldier? Are you really seeing God, or are you just crazy? And she really begins to doubt herself, because throughout the film, she would begin to have less and less visions, and it'd be even further times apart. She'd go weeks without having a vision from God. Of course, these visions were telling her to help the king, and once she did help the king of France, he wasn't the king, he was the Dauphin. He later became the king to become a king. Now that she was helping him, these visions weren't coming anymore. So she began to be concerned and think that maybe she really wasn't the real thing. And like I said before, I understand that they were trying to give her kind of a more of a three-dimensional view than just, the flat image of herself. But I really didn't she's a Catholic saint. She is a huge French icon. You're a French director. she's kind of a symbol of nationalism. Like, our Betsy Ross is their Joan of Arc, except for if Betsy Ross was like made into George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. If they were all put together, that would be their Joan of Arc. It's just huge icons, and they're making, and he made Joan seem crazy. I mean, I don't even like Joan of Arc anymore after watching this movie. And I don't think that was what he was trying to do. It just, that's what it did. It made Joan of Arc seem like she wasn't a legitimate person, and that we blow things out of proportion. It also took away the religious side of Joan of Arc, because by saying that she wasn't really from God, are we saying that God doesn't exist? Everyone in our history who said that they were sent from God, what if they weren't? What if they're all crazy? That leads you to think maybe Jesus wasn't sent by God. I mean, I'm not religious by any means, but this kind of made me mad that there's kind of this question. It's an anti-religious, pro-humanist movie, I think is how you would phrase it. And I mean, like I said, I'm not religious, but I was pretty offended by this movie, which I think is probably why it got such low ratings here in America, because we're pretty religious here, and we don't like our religion questioned, unfortunately. But this movie, I like the music. I added some of it on my iPhone. I like it a lot. But it's not something I think I would watch again. Thank you.